Out of all of the books that I read, I've now created a list of 13 books, and I'm sure out of the 13 that I suggest, you're going to find 3 to 5 of the books that are just a perfect fit for you. I was in exactly the same place last year that you're in now, the space where you want to start your reading habit, but you're not really sure what books to read. So last year I had a friend who curated a list of books for me, and her taste was exceptional, and I find myself very privileged that you have clicked on this video and that you are allowing me to suggest a list of books. And how I will be sharing the books is I'll just be telling you what the book is called. I'm going to give you a little bit of information as to why or how I think the book would be a good fit for the season of life that you could be in. And then I'm going to just briefly speak about why I think the book is good. So I'm not going to give you a lot of information actually with regards to what the book is about, because I don't like it. I like it when people tell me, oh my gosh, you have to read this book because this book is going to make you smile, or this is such a thought-provoking book. So I'm going to describe the essence of the book in as few words as possible. That will hopefully be the springboard that you need to either get your hands on the book or just make you realize it's probably not the book for you. So there's going to be a whole bunch of genres because I like reading everything. And with that out of the way, I think we can get into my first book recommendation. So we're going to start with Lessons in Chemistry. Now, I describe this book as the perfect combination of an easy read and thought-provoking. I actually said this to the person at the bookstore when I was buying the book, and a mom with 2 kids was like, wait, what book is this? And I was like, Lessons in Chemistry. And she's like, thought-provoking and an easy read. I was like, yes. And she's like, oh, I also want that book. So I loved this book. It is perfect for you if you're in a space where you want to have a bit of a switch up in your life and maybe your career. So I had a friend last year who quit her corporate job, and I bought this book for her as a gift because it was just, I think, the perfect gift for somebody who is going through a bit of a shakeup or wants a bit of a shakeup. The author does something very early on in the book that I think was very brave, because that usually only happens in the 3rd act of a book or halfway in the book, but never early on in the book. And I was quite surprised, which is always nice when you're reading and you're like, wow, brave choice. But also the book is just so good, and there's a series. So I would recommend first reading the book and then watching the series. I think they're very different, but they're beautiful in their own rights. Next, we have The Outsiders. This book is a masterclass in how few pages you actually need to tell a brilliant, moving story. I would say that this book is for you if you're in a space where you just don't feel like diving into a big chunky book. And if you want to start with something short, then you can't go wrong with this one, because it is funny. It's almost made me cry, and it is just beautiful. Like, I found myself so many times in this book being moved, like genuinely moved, but also inspired and just reminded of that childlike wonder. So whether it's the first book you start with or a book that you pop in somewhere down the line, I highly, highly recommend this one. Next, we have Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. Now here we have a bit of a tone change. So I would say the first 2 books are lighter books, although the second book does have elements of darker tones, but not quite like this book. This book is entering into the thriller space. So if you are in the mood for a good thriller, but something that is still easy reading and somewhat on the light-hearted side, but not really light-hearted, I couldn't put this book down. It was wow. When I read this book, I was completely blown away. It was one of those books where you get so sucked into the story that you're not really sure who wrote it, because you can't really feel the author's voice in it, because the story is just so gripping that it pretty much just pulls you through. So if you're in the mood for a thriller, you can't go wrong with this book. Now we're going to talk about Anatomy of a Scandal. I absolutely loved this book. I loved this book. Also, we're dealing with a bit of a thriller here, but what this book did to me is teach me something or give words and somewhat illustrate something that I think a lot of women experience, but you're not really sure of how to talk about it or whether it's okay or not. Like it connected with me on such a deep level. So again, if you're in the mood for something a little bit darker, highly recommend this. But also what I loved about it is that it had an older protagonist. I think the main character is in her 40s, and I just love reading books where people still have lives in their 30s and their 40s. So I really loved this book, and there is a series. I would recommend reading the book before watching the series. I didn't have a problem with the series, just like a couple of things that I was like, really, you want to do that interesting choice? So if you have watched the series first, because I know it was quite big on Netflix, I would say that you still have to read the book, because the book is going to move you in a way that the series, well, it didn't for me. Again, didn't hate the series, but I absolutely loved the book, and I cannot recommend this one enough. We're now going to talk about The Girls of Summer. And if you have been on my channel for a while, then you know I speak about this book all the time. This book had the biggest effect on me last year. It actually inspired me to write my own book. I love the way that this book is set up. It has then and now chapters. So the then sort of gives you context, and the now is sort of the protagonist going through life currently, and it just makes sense as to why she acts the way that she does when you hear about the past. But when I saw this book, I thought, oh, this is going to be maybe like a rom-com book. I wasn't quite sure what to make from the cover, but it says here, what if everything you remember was a lie? And I'm not gonna lie, that was hooky enough for me to be like, oh gosh, what if it was? And oh my word, this book shook me. It shook me, it rocked me in a way that I did not expect it to. And I related to so much of the story, not because of what actually happens in the story, but I think there's so many similarities that, again, women can pull from through going through this protagonist's journey. So I would say you might think that this is lighthearted, but it's quite dark. However, it's not so uncomfortably dark that you're like, oh gosh, no, I don't know if I can do this. So I would recommend this, again, if you're in the mood for something easy reading, and if you're okay to do a bit of work, because you are jumping from the past to the present. So, you know, that's a bit of a different mindset you have to be in. But love this. Love this book. Okay, we're now going to talk about Q&A. And I think this might be one of my favorite books of all time, but I am going to start out by saying that this book is not for everyone. I kind of just wish that everyone would be able to read it though, because the perspective on life that somebody who is going through like some of the most awful life experiences is able to have, like it really inspires me to just try to be a lot more positive and find the humor in life. I think sometimes it's easy for people to just look at stuff and just get negative and stay negative. And this for me was a beautiful example of somebody who has every right to just be super angry at life in the world, and just looking at how this person goes through life. Oh gosh, it's so good. But let me just start off by saying the first 3 chapters are like really uncomfortable to read. I remember getting to end of the 3rd chapter and being like, surely not, like flip, like can this get worse? Because it's like gut-wrenchingly uncomfortable to read. It made, oh gosh, no, I mean it was so tough to get through those first 3 chapters. But then as the book continues, it's almost like you've been desensitized in a way to how like hard life can be for some people, and you're like, okay, well, we've been there. So then you kind of move forward, and then you're almost able to move forward with the protagonist. And like I said, the way that the protagonist looks at life and goes through life, it helps you go through the chapters with the protagonist and almost get into their mind. and it's brilliant. It is so brilliant. This was one of those books where I had to finish the chapter each time. I could then have a break, go to sleep, and the next day I was like, okay, let's continue. And this book is exceptional. It is so well written. It just the way that everything makes sense, like how all the chapters sort of, if you've seen the movie, movie's incredible, but the book is different. And the movie was incredible, like I said, and the book is incredible too, so do both. The movie is called Slumdog Millionaire. I watched that many years ago, but last year I read the book, and wow. This book is just something. It would be the best gift that you could give yourself if you can get through the first 3 chapters. All right, now we're going to talk about The Light Between Oceans. Now, this book starts off a little bit slow. I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't like gripped immediately, but then I got gripped and this book broke me. It broke me. I would recommend this if you're in a space where you want to have a good cry, and if you're in a space where you're ready for a bit of a challenge, because this is not light-hearted. I struggled reading this book, not in the sense of physically reading it, but emotionally, like the pain and the heartache, and I just didn't even feel like I could breathe. This book ruined me. It was almost torture, and I'm so glad that I read it. It challenged me so much on how I view right and wrong. It destroyed me, and I broke. I literally broke reading this book. I don't think I've cried this hard for anything else last year, and I had reasons to cry last year, but this book was, yes, I have to say it's brilliant for a book to be able to get in my head and in my heart and just rip at me the way that it did. And it wasn't just me. I had a couple of girlfriends also then take on the challenge of reading this book, and we all felt exactly the same. So this is definitely not a fun one, but it's one to maybe read if you're part of a book club or if you have some girlfriends. I don't want to touch too much on the topics. I mean, like it could be, you might have to be sensitive to people who've maybe had miscarriages. But I think I wouldn't even like run away from it because of that, because it gives you so much empathy and understanding as to how people who've gone through something that difficult, how they have to go through life. And it's such a brilliant book. I have all the respect in the world for the author for being able to break me in the way that the author managed to. Now we're going to talk about The Flat Share. After the last few recommendations, I'm very happy to mention that this is super light-hearted, and if you're in the space where all you want to do is smile, I recommend this book. My cheeks were sore from smiling. It's like a Nancy Meyers film in a way, and if you love The Holiday or It's Complicated, if you just love a good rom-com, then I think you will love this book. I was blown away. I actually made a video just ranting about how fantastic this book is, but just the worlds that the author was able to create, the unique voices, the perspectives, the way that the characters interacted with each other. I love a good book where they write letters to each other, and they do here, and it's romantic, it's fun, it's very interestingly enough. It also, for me, within like the first chapter, it might even be in the second page, the way that we are introduced to the main character, your heart just connects with her. I think, again, all women have probably to some extent been through what she's been through, or had somebody close to you who's had some sort of similar experience, or like very relatable, but easy read and very light-hearted. Highly recommend. Now, as I mentioned, I love reading a whole variety of books, So the next book is Atomic Habits, and if you want to hear more recommendations of non-fiction books, let me know, because I can make a whole video about those as well. But I just had to slip Atomic Habits in here because this is a book after all about creating your reading habits, and you could not get a better book on habits. You've probably read it, the whole world has, but if you haven't, please read it. It is so fantastic. And I mean, there's so many things that subconsciously I do now as a result of reading that book. But my husband actually read it last year in Jan, and I don't know who the guy was. Like, he inspired me so much for the first couple of months of last year, just him reading the book. And it's different as you're reading it and as you're applying it, because I mean, when you finish the book, you don't have that daily interaction with it, so like follow through is a little bit difficult, but it's impactful enough that there is likely to be huge changes in your life as a result of reading that book. And there's a reason it's been, I think, on the bestsellers list for like the last 5 years, so you can't go wrong with reading Atomic Habits. We're going to now talk about salmon fishing in the Yemen, and this was one of the first books I read last year, if not the first book that my friend suggested that I read, and I loved this book. Firstly, the way that the story is told is very different to anything you've probably ever read. It's a whole collection of emails and letters, and I think even faxes, but you might think that's off-putting. I know when my friend described that to me, I was like, okay, but very clever, just very, very clever. And this book was gripping. The themes that it explored are very relevant and relatable in the world that we're living today. But what I appreciated so much about this book is how it seemed to touch on a lot of the things that I love when I'm reading. So there's, a conflict, and a very palpable conflict. So the whole time you're like on the edge of your seat. And at the same time, there's a beautiful love story in there. And what happens in the main character's relationship, I think, is also relatable to people who've ever been in a relationship. And yeah, I don't want to give too much away. All I can say about this book is expect the unexpected. And if you're in a space where you want something light-hearted, very light, I found this book to, the topics, and like I said, the themes, they're not necessarily light-hearted themes, but the way that the story is communicated is in a way that it feels like an easy read, and at the end of it, you kind of like lean back a little bit, and I at least was moved and challenged and surprised. I was surprised, and I'm glad I read it. Recommend. We're now going to talk about The Outside Boy, and this book has to be right up there with Q&A in terms of the best book that I have ever read. It surprised me so much. I didn't know what to expect when I went into it, and it took me a while to get into the rhythm of the book. Not long, but I wasn't sure where we were going. And when I eventually got comfortable and I related to the characters, I just fell in love with this book. I did have a good cry at the end, but it's sad, but I think I cried more from just how beautiful the book was. I was blown away by how somebody was able to put something like this together. This book is for you if you feel like a good story. I would say it is 10 out of 10 for like in terms of good story. It has a love story. The themes that this book just touches on, they're so relatable to whatever phase of life you're in, and the story is told through the eyes of a young boy. So I think I really relate, or I'm drawn to books where there's just a bit of innocence. I think I like to look at the world sometimes a bit too naively, and I think when you look at the world through a kid's eyes, there are huge positives to that. And this book sort of just reminds you about that instead of, keeping us all old and cynical. So I loved this book, and the story is fantastic. It is absolutely brilliant. please buy this book for yourself and for somebody you really love and read it with them, because wow, such a good one. And now we're on to Eat, Pray, Love. I feel like everybody has already read this book, but I did a poll on my channel and quite a few people actually haven't. So I am going to talk about this book. I saw the movie and I love the movie. I've seen that movie so many times, but last year was actually the year that I read this book. And something about this book is, I mean, it's Elizabeth's memoir, so you definitely get to learn her voice or hear her voice in this book. But this is one of the books where I I like the book, but I love the author. I mean, the amount of Liz Gilbert podcast episodes I have listened to, interviews, just everything that this woman talks about, I'm just like, yes, tell me more, tell me more. She is one of the most incredible women, I think, who is on this planet. And I just find it a privilege that I get to read something she has written, and I definitely want to read more of her books this year. If you haven't read the book yet, give it a read. There's a reason this book is so popular. I don't think I have to say much more about it. Oh, okay, but on the odd chance that you haven't read it, it's for you. If you are in a space where you want to have again a bit of a shake-up, or if you're not happy with life currently, maybe if you're going through a divorce, maybe also if you're in a space where you want to explore spirituality and just go on the ride of somebody else's life and hopefully be inspired afterwards to create something like this for your own life as well. Chef's kiss, great book, fabulous author, love. Finally, we're going to end off with Love Theoretically. I love a good romance book, and I especially love them when I'm in a phase of life where I'm like, I don't want to think, I don't want to work, I just need a break. And this book is unreal. It is so good. It is an enemies to lovers romance trope, and this book makes sense. I sometimes have read romance books where I feel like people are trying so hard for the enemies to lovers dynamic to work, but this just works. It is brilliant. I've read it twice. I've made notes. I've really found myself reading this book where I've just been like, amazing, smart, clever, yes, author, you've got this. Like, I just am championing the author along the way, because I know how difficult it is to write a book, but I've also read so many romance books that just, I mean, I wouldn't say that they are lazy, because they're not, but they just don't work as well as this book does. So if you are in this space where you're just like, please, can I just don't make me work, then this book is going to make you feel wonderful things, and I'm excited if this is something that you're going to read. Love this book, highly recommend. And with that, I have finished my list. There are so many more books, 5-star books that I could have spoken about, but I didn't want to be too genre heavy on one genre. I know I didn't get into fantasy or sci-fi books, but those aren't necessarily my favorite reads, although I do love a good sci-fi, and I did read a good one this year, but it just ended and I was like, this should be the middle. Like, where's the rest of the book? So I am curious to see what other books I'm going to read this year. I am part of 2 book clubs, and I love asking people for book recommendations. So if there's anything that you've read, whether it was last year or ever, and you think it's a 5-star read, let me know about it in the comments, because there's a good chance that I will read it. I love reading books that people recommend, more so than going into a bookstore and looking at all of the books and reading their blurbs. Like, that gives me decision fatigue. If somebody's like, you should read this book because it's brilliant, that's pretty much all I need to read a book. So let me know if you'd like a non-fiction list of books. And again, let me know what you've read. That's amazing. I'll see you in a future video. Take care. Bye-bye.